I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And here we are, my favorite episode of the year, my final predictions for the 2025 Oscar nominations. We've been covering things now all the way back since October, giving my thoughts, giving my predictions, seeing how the race unfolds, reacting to certain award shows and nominations that have come out. All really for this point. Now, we won't be done after this episode. I'm going to be giving my live reactions to the Oscar nominations and then all the way up until the Oscars, give some analysis before giving my final predictions as to what I think is going to win. But I say this is my favorite episode of the year just because there's so much complexity as well to the nominations in all the different categories and all the precursors that you can read and do a deep dive on, which we have been on this channel now for over 8.5 years. This is our 9th season predicting the Oscars, and we've done very well over the past years. You can go back and check our scores. Top 10% Gold Derby, 80% usual, kind of 75% average in terms of overall nominations. And that's because we do the work on the top of the categories, but also the bottom of the line categories. So we're going to be talking about the acting categories at top, but also the animated shorts and some of my research that went into that as well. If you just want to see my predictions, feel free to go to the description and you can see them all outlined there. I also have timestamps where you can jump around, hear my thoughts on individual categories. And as always, I'd love to hear your comments down below. Please do let me know your own predictions. They can be just the top acting or picture or what have you. Or if you have any kind of questions for others in the community, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And we've had some great responses in terms of having an active comment section. So I can encourage you to continue to do that because that's the reason why I make these videos, to have an awesome film-loving Oscar community. But without further ado, let's jump into things because this is going to be a long one. Starting off with my predictions for Best Picture. The following are Anora, The Brutalist, Conclave, Emilia Pérez, Wicked, A Complete Unknown, The Substance, Dune Part 2, A Real Pain, and Sing Sing. So the top 4 have gone in most places, and I feel very confident that those are kind of the main Oscar contenders, whether it be BAFTA, Critics' Choice, or Golden Globes. They've done very well over the course of the season. Then I have Wicked, which is also a movie that's done really well, particularly since it's come out and gotten in most places, even though it doesn't have maybe as much international support as we think. It's still a big budgeted musical that was well liked, that did well at the box office, and the Oscars usually like to reward 1 or 2 of those every year, so expect that to get in. Then I had A Complete Unknown. This is a movie that's been surging recently, doing an overperformance at SAG, getting in at DGA, even getting in at PGA. It's really indicative that this is a movie that the Academy or that the industry has really kind of rallied behind. So that I think definitely gets in. Then I had Dune Part 2, kind of like Wicked being another big blockbuster from a respected auteur though, in Denis Villeneuve, who's had his last movie, Dune Part 1, nominated, and past movies like Arrival as well. So he's well respected within the industry. Would be surprised if this doesn't get nominated, although it is kind of been maybe not as well appreciated as what we thought earlier on in the season. It's still going to be in the Best Picture lineup most likely. Then I had The Substance, which is a movie that I was hesitant to nominate, but is pretty clearly, I think, in for a nomination after getting in at, BAFTA, doing well with the BAFTA long list, and has, a chance for multiple acting nominations. I think maybe even director and screenplay, which we'll talk about a little bit later, should be very solid for a nomination. Then in my 9th slot, I went with A Real Pain. We predicted this movie all the way back in October, and because we usually see one Sundance movie appear within the Best Picture lineup every year, whether that be Call Me By Your Name or Minari, usually there's one movie that kind of sticks around that was been released earlier on in the year and just continually is well liked. Usually in these 9-10 slots, it's not the movie like a Nosferatu that gets a bunch of technical nominations that gets in for Best Picture. Most of the time, it's like a woman talking. They'll get a screenplay, maybe an acting, and then get in for picture. I think that's the path to A Real Pain, where you have a very likely, I think, Best Supporting Actor win in Kieran Culkin, and a very solid shot at a screenplay nomination. Plus it got in at PGA, plus it kind of got in at Critics' Choice Awards, so it's been kind of staying. It has a strong staying power throughout the season. And that's what you want to see from a movie like this. So I do think it does kind of fit in that last spot in number 9. And then in my 10th spot, I went with Sing Sing, How the Mighty Have Fallen. I thought this was maybe a potential Best Picture winner. earlier on in the season back in October, and now we're at the stage where it may not even get nominated. That's a very realistic possibility. But for me, it was between this and Nickel Boys. Now, neither of them made PGA, which hurt, and Nickel Boys made Golden Globes, but Sing Sing didn't make Golden Globes, so you may go with Nickel Boys there. But the way I looked at it ultimately was Nickel Boys has a chance for screenplay and then possibly director and then maybe cinematography, and that's it. Whereas Sing Sing, I think, has an equal chance of getting in for that same category, adapted screenplay, but it has a very likely chance of getting Colman Domingo in for actor. So actor, screenplay, I think beats out over just screenplay and maybe cinematography. Yes, Nickel Boys is more of a traditional Academy type movie, but they're really, and I want to nominate it, but for Nickel Boys, there just hasn't been enough support within the other industry awards. I mean, why didn't Ramel Ross get the main category at DGA? Or why didn't Ramel Ross not get longlisted at BAFTA DGA? Or why wasn't there any support for Anjou Ellis Taylor at all, really, aside from Critics' Choice Awards? And why didn't it get in at PGA? I mean, there's just been so many times where it's missed and underperformed that I didn't feel confident ultimately putting in my predictions. So I went with Sing Sing because it has that kind of more guaranteed acting nomination, and I also think it could get in for screenplay. Now my predictions for Best Actress. I have Mikey Madison for Anora, Karla Sofía Gascón for Emilia Pérez, Demi Moore for The Substance, Cynthia Erivo for Wicked, and Fernanda Torres for I'm Still Here. So the top three have gotten everywhere, confident in those. Then I had Cynthia Erivo for Wicked, who has also gotten in everywhere. I've seen some concern, and I've had a little bit of concern myself that maybe she's the Margot Robbie of this year, where Margot Robbie missed, even despite getting in everywhere, because she's in more of a kind of a blockbuster type movie in the same way Wicked was. The difference being, why I still have her in my predictions, is that there's no other kind of competition. I don't really see who's going to knock her out, whereas last year with Margot Robbie, Annette Bening was in a strong movie in Nyad, and she also got in at SAG, and Annette Bening is a 4-time nominee, so there was kind of a benefit there. The only person that I could see maybe knocking out Cynthia Erivo would be like a Pamela Anderson in The Last Showgirl, but she's never been nominated before. Her narrative that she hasn't been nominated before is kind of being taken up by Demi Moore, who's kind of got the same narrative, kind of a comeback narrative, so it kind of cancels her out, I think, in a way. I also don't think the movie is as well liked. A movie like last year with Nyad was a stronger movie versus a movie like The Last Showgirl. So I have ultimately some concerns there, which is why I just didn't see an alternative to knock out Cynthia Erivo. She's gotten in everywhere. She's in a well-liked movie. She's a past nominee as well, so I expect her to get in. And then in my final spot, I did go with Fernanda Torres for I'm Still Here. Truthfully, it was a tough one to call, but went with Fernanda because I think in the absence of kind of any statistical precursors, where there's the same amount of stats that say a Golden Globe win has a high likelihood of getting a nomination, as does Marianne Baptiste's BAFTA nomination. So they kind of cancel each other out in that sense. So I ultimately went to the types of characters that they played and what's the more performance that's easiest to root for, because sometimes we do see that. And they went with Fernanda Torres, who is more strong and defiant in her role, versus Marianne Baptiste, who is actively displeasant in her role, and then that's the point of the movie. But I think there's going to be some voters that are just going to be like, I didn't like her character, and therefore not going to nominate her, even if that's not necessarily the point of the category. That's going to be the case there. And ultimately just can't get over the fact that I don't know why Hard Truth wasn't more accepted at BAFTA. It should have been. So I think it's actually secretly a bit of an underperformance at that nominations and ultimately awards group. So I went with Fernanda Torres. She also makes sense in the sense that she's been campaigning a lot in these past few weeks, and I think the delays have only helped her case. And we've seen actresses like Andrea Riseborough, who've done a lot of campaigning, get nominated kind of at the last second. And with the Academy becoming more international, it makes sense to go with an international performance in the case of Fernanda Torres over someone like Marianne Baptiste. Then for Best Actor, my picks are Adrien Brody, The Brutalist, Ralph Fiennes, Conclave, Timothée Chalamet, A Complete Unknown, Colman Domingo, Sing Sing, and Daniel Craig for Queer. So the top four have gone in most places, and I'd be surprised if any of those men missed out. So it ultimately came down to the fifth slot. And on my last video, I saw a lot of comments supporting Stan, and I think really opened my eyes to the possibility of Stan getting nominated. So I appreciate that, and it definitely made me consider that it's probably more of a race than I had said in that video. That being said, I still ultimately did go with Daniel Craig for Queer after taking a good hard look at things, just because I don't think Craig has as many things to overcome. If you just want to put it simply, they have similar precursors in the sense that they both got in Golden Globes, but Craig got in at SAG and Stan got in at BAFTA. If I were to give a preference to anyone, I would go to SAG because those are actors voting on performances in the same way that the Academy's acting branch nominates these top five. So clearly the actors maybe slightly like Craig more than Sebastian Stan. I also think it's worth noting that Sebastian Stan maybe has one too many hurdles to overcome that Craig doesn't. First of all, he's not as big or as famous as a star. That hurts him there. He also has another movie in A Different Man who's also competing in this category, so there may be people that vote for him for that movie and not for Apprentice, therefore kind of splitting his overall support and his votes. And I also think that there are going to be more people that just either A, don't watch The Apprentice or not going to like his performance in his role because of the man who he is playing, in the case of Donald Trump. I don't think people are going to vote for him as a kind of FU to Trump. I think it's going to be more of a hesitance to go, am I really going to essentially vote for Donald Trump and vote for this portrayal of him? There's going to be a huge hurdle to overcome. I do think that there's going to be just frankly members of the Academy that will not vote for that performance because of who he plays. So you have that, you have the vote splitting, you have the fact that he didn't get it in at SAG, so he has about equal chances as Craig. Ultimately, Craig just doesn't have as much to overcome. I know it's not as strong of a movie, but there's too many negatives, I think, rather than... this is not an argument that says all these positives for Daniel Craig and Queer. This is more so an argument of there are so many negatives against Sebastian Stan that I couldn't justify putting him in for that fifth spot. Then for Best Supporting Actress, I have Zoe Saldana, Emilia Pérez, Ariana Grande, Wicked, Isabella Rossellini, Conclave, Jamie Lee Curtis, The Last Showgirl, and Selena Gomez for Emilia Pérez. So Zoe and Ariana have gone in everywhere, confident about those two. Then I'm pretty confident about Isabella Rossellini in Conclave. This is the group that nominated America Ferrera last year, who has one big speech in Barbie that I think got her nominated. In the same way Isabella Rossellini has one kind of good big speech in this movie. So I think she can get nominated. She's the type of performer that does get nominated, particularly by the Academy, the older actress, established, veteran, in the same way. They'll nominate Judi Dench for Belfast or Glenn Close for Hillbilly Elegy. Oh yeah, and as well, Conclave is a likely Best Picture nominee, maybe even a Best Picture winner. Those movies always overperform in terms of Oscar nominations. Feel confident about those three. Then my fourth spot, I did go with Jamie Lee Curtis. She got in at BAFTA and SAG. She's been in the news just with the wildfires after donating $1 million. So she's, I think, done a great job campaigning and making her case heard. We've seen this year over year of recent winners getting nominated a couple of years after, whether it be a Sam Rockwell or a Mahershala Ali, for example, or a Tom Hanks or who have you. We do see this frequently where someone gets nominated and then a couple of years later gets nominated again after just having won because they like you, they like the actor. And then she has the fact of support from BAFTA and support from SAG, 2 industry awards, international branch and American branch. Clearly she has the support. And then I went with Selena Gomez for Emilia Pérez. The way I looked at it was, I think her not getting in at SAG was a disappointment, but I think it is more interesting that she got in at BAFTA. Whereas Felicity Jones getting in at BAFTA, which would be my alternative, wasn't as surprising, and I had some concerns with her. But speaking about why I think Selena Gomez is going to get nominated, she did get in at BAFTA, she didn't get in at Golden Globe, so she's got some industry nominations. We know Emilia Pérez is a well-liked movie. Usually well-liked movies, Best Picture movies, overperform in terms of Oscar nominations. That helps there. The Oscars also, this Academy in particular, loves to nominate 2 performances from the same movie. They didn't do it last year, but before that, they had a streak of 5 or 6 years where they were doing it in one of the supporting actor categories. So they like nominating 2 performances from the same movies that they like. In the case of Emilia Pérez, I think they like. And I think actually Selena Gomez getting in for BAFTA, even beating out one of her co-stars in Adriana Paz, who was also shortlisted at BAFTA, showcases just an overall level of support for the performances in that movie. So I'm betting on the movie, Emilia Pérez. I'm betting on the fact she did get a couple of precursors, and I'm betting on the fact that the Academy likes having two performances from the same movie nominated in one category. And I mentioned my alternative was Felicity Jones, but the things that ultimately left me to keep her on the outside was the fact that I think a common complaint with a lot of people, critics, but also just regular people, is that the second half of the Brutalist isn't as good as the first half, and I do think that will hurt her chances because Felicity is in the second half of the movie. I think there was no reason for her to miss Critics' Choice Awards. That was a little bit of a disappointment. Of course, she didn't get in for SAG, and ultimately the way I looked at it was SAG didn't really like The Brutalist. It didn't get in for Ensemble. It didn't get in for Guy Pearce. It didn't get in for Felicity Jones. It would be odd for me to go ignore that completely and nominate Felicity Jones and nominate Guy Pearce. I think one of them has to miss. So I went with Felicity Jones because she's in the weaker part of the Brutalist by consensus, I would say. And she didn't get in at Critics' Choice when that should have been a slam dunk. And she didn't get nominated at SAG. And she did get in at BAFTA, yes. And she is in a well-liked movie. But so is Selena Gomez, who also got in at BAFTA, who is also in a well-liked movie. And then has the benefit of being... having another actor in her movie also being nominated in this category, which would help kind of that Academy's almost preference. Then my picks for Best Supporting Actor, I have Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain, Yura Borisov for Anora, Edward Norton for A Complete Unknown, Guy Pearce for The Brutalist, and Jeremy Strong for The Apprentice. So the top three have gone in everywhere, literally everywhere, BAFTA, SAG, Critics' Choice, Golden Globes, everywhere. They're definitely getting nominated, all from likely Best Picture nominees. Then my fourth spot, I did go with Guy Pearce for The Brutalist. I do think that this is still going to be a well-liked movie. I think that he's gotten in everywhere except for SAG, and his nomination at BAFTA was a bit of a sign of strength because he's not British, so there's no hometown bias there. I am betting on the success of The Brutalist ultimately. I mentioned just now that I have concerns that the SAG's misses are going to bleed in, but I have Felicity Jones missing, so I think it makes sense for Guy Pearce still to get in for The Brutalist, and his competition I think was a little bit weaker, where, Sing Sing for Clarence Macklin or Denzel Washington for Gladiator 2, those are not as strong movies as something like The Brutalist, and he's also in a significant part of the first half of the movie, and is maybe a little bit more integral to the story than Felicity Jones overall, so there's a benefit there. And then my fifth spot went with Jeremy Strong for The Apprentice, who got in everywhere. The only reason why I have him in my fifth spot is slight concerns that The Apprentice won't be appreciated by the Academy and the American members of the Academy, but still he has the benefit of not being the person to play Donald Trump. He's playing someone else. It's a typical type of a role, transformative, and like I mentioned, got in at SAG, got in at BAFTA, got in at the Golden Globes. Like, he has been in pretty much everywhere, so I think that he's got a strong chance as well. Then Best Director, I went with Brady Corbett, The Brutalist, Sean Baker, Anora, Jacques Audiard, Emilia Pérez, Corley Farja, Substance, and Edward Berger for Conclave. I feel really good about this lineup. I mentioned it on my DGA reactions video, where there could be crazy upsets and Ramel Ross could get in and totally shake things up, but I just wanted to be safe and just make the most obvious picks, which is most years the DGA gets 4 out of 5 correct. Okay, so you take the DGA 5 and you have to remove one person. Who do I remove? James Mangold. Why? He didn't get in at Critics' Choice. He didn't make the BAFTA long list. He's the clear outlier that hasn't gotten nominated anywhere else. So take out James Mangold. And then who do you replace it with? Usually the replacement goes to an international director. Who are the international directors this year? Corley Farja, Mohamed Rasoulof, Payal Kapadia. What's the difference? Corley Farja's movie, The Substance, is likely to get nominated for Best Picture in the same way that, Ryusuke Hamaguchi's movie got nominated for Drive My Car, or Jonathan Glazer last year, or Justine Triet. Usually the international director, even someone like Ruben Östlund for Triangle of Sadness, usually the international director also has their movie nominated for Best Picture. So because I had The Substance getting in for Best Picture, and because this is an international director, and because Corley Farja did show up at places like BAFTA, I did think that there's still enough support and signs of support for her overall movie. Didn't want to overthink this. This makes the most sense as the top 5, so I went with it. Then for Best Original Screenplay, I went with Anora, The Brutalist, A Real Pain, The Substance, and Challengers. The top 4 are pretty clear from me. They got in at BAFTAs, Critics' Choice Awards. They even got in at the Golden Globes, and they only have one screenplay category, so that top 4 is very strong. And then my fifth spot, I went with Challengers, and to me it was between Challengers, September 5, and Hard Truths. Hard Truths, I couldn't get over the fact that it didn't make the BAFTA long list for screenplay. Even though the Academy likes Mikey actually a little bit more than BAFTA, it should have at least made the long list in that category. The screenplay also hasn't been getting a lot of critics' prizes. It's been more Marianne Jean-Baptiste for actress that's been getting the critics' prizes for that movie, not the screenplay. So I left that out, and then a movie like September 5 just recently got in at PGA, but there have been PGA movies that got in that didn't get screenplay nominations, like Wonder Woman, like Crazy Rich Asians, so that didn't really concern me too much. Ultimately, I went with Challengers. Challengers fits the mold well in that it is not a Best Picture nominee, but it is kind of probably in the 12-13 spot. I think it's notable that it made the shortlist for screenplay at BAFTA, even when the movie wasn't really well liked. Like Zendaya didn't make the BAFTA long list, and Score didn't get in for that movie for the long list. So the fact that the screenplay showed up at the long list there indicates to me that when people think of the movie, they think of the screenplay. It's been not getting a lot of screenplay wins necessarily, only got a couple, but it's been getting a lot of nominations. I counted like 13 or 14 screenplay nominations for the movie from a bunch of critics groups, Toronto, San Diego, Florida, Chicago, from really all over the place. And finally, when we think about this category, they kind of go with the cool indie pick. They'll go with The Worst Person in the World as a surprise, or they'll go with The Lobster. So Challengers, I think, fits more into that mold of the critics pick of the kind of cool indie movie, more so than a movie like September 5, which is maybe a little bit more traditional and Hollywood. I think Challengers gets in for that final spot. Then for Best Adapted Screenplay, I have Conclave, Emilia Pérez, A Complete Unknown, Sing Sing, and Nickel Boys. So when we were looking at these categories, sometimes it helps to look at the screenplay categories and Best Picture. And we went back and I checked, and there's about an average of 1.7 of the Best Picture nominees that don't get a screenplay nomination. So I want to kind of echo that as well and say that 1.7, let's round that up to 2 and say Dune and Wicked both miss out on this category instead of including them in, because at the very least, there's usually at least one movie that gets nominated for Best Picture that does not get a screenplay prize. So I didn't want to include Dune and also Wicked in this category. Instead, it went for more screenplay-focused movies. So the first two, Emilia Pérez and Conclave, have been getting in at most places for this category and even got in at the general screenplay category at the Golden Globes. Then I went with A Complete Unknown, which is a movie that has been overperformed at SAG, overperformed at DGA, gone in at PGA. I think that hasn't have the negative of a movie like Wicked, which is also a strong Best Picture movie, in that Wicked is a musical, and musicals like Les Miserables or West Side Story don't get nominated for screenplay. There's kind of a musical bias in the screenplay category. A Complete Unknown doesn't have that fact, so I think that will help there. And it's just a generally well-liked movie. I think it's in the kind of top 5, 6 of Best Picture, so I wanted to include it there. Then I went with Nickel Boys, just because I think it will have the benefit of being based on a well-known novel. So when people think of adaptation, they're going to think of that. It also has a creative approach to adaptation. I also think this is an option to nominate Ramel Ross instead of nominating him as director. Same thing for Sing Sing, where they can nominate Greg Cuidar because he also wrote the screenplay. Sing Sing, though, I do have in the 5th spot just because it doesn't have the benefit of being based off in a celebrated novel. But still, because I have it in for Colman Domingo, I also want to have it in for a screenplay, because I also have it in for picture. That's kind of the most traditional path there. And I do think it's notable that both Nickel Boys and Sing Sing weren't absolutely beloved by like a group like BAFTA, and yet they still got in for adapted screenplay. So while we don't have the USC scripters, which are usually helpful in this category, I figured let's go with the more literary ones in the case of Sing Sing and Nickel Boys over like Best Picture movies that aren't as focused on the writing, like Dune or Wicked. Then for Best Cinematography, I went with The Brutalist, Conclave, Nosferatu, Emilia Pérez, and Maria. This was maybe the toughest category for me to predict. I went back and forth, but I'll give you my thoughts and reasonings as to what. So actually the top 3 feel pretty confident in. They've gotten nominated most places. You have a past nominee in the case of Jaron Blaschke with Nosferatu, so that makes sense. And The Brutalist and Conclave are 2 movies that are very well liked. I also have those top 3 picks are also nominated for me for Best Production Design. Oftentimes we see an overlap between the production design category and the cinematography category of an average of 3 out of 5. So I wanted to have at least 3. Those 3 are there. Then in my fourth spot, I did go with Emilia Pérez because of its performance at Camera Image. So there's some things to note. First of all, Emilia Pérez missed out on the ASC, which was notable, but it is the American Society of Cinematographers. When we look at the kind of more European groups, they've all loved it. Camera Image got the third place there, the Golden Frog, the Bronze Frog. Then it also got in at BSC, the British Society of Cinematographers. It also got in at BAFTA. So to me, that indicates that there's clearly a European level support for this movie. And then I go, well, what does this branch usually do? They usually go with the more European type movies. They'll go with Bardo or Tar over movies like Top Gun Maverick or The Batman. So they're a little bit more inclined to do that. And also with Camera Image, most years, 2 out of the top three movies get nominated for cinematography. The Brutalist got second. The Girl with the Needle got first. I don't have The Girl with the Needle, so I want to include 2 out of the 3. Emilia Pérez made sense as the kind of more European pick. Don't be surprised if Emilia Pérez gets in. And then in my fifth spot, I did go with Maria Ed Lockman. Really for this final spot, I wanted to go with a past nominee because they historically at least nominate about 2 or 3 out of the 5 nominees are past nominees. That means they've been nominated in the past with other movies. Ed Lockman is a well-respected cinematographer. He got nominated last year for El Conde, another Netflix movie that also only got 1 nomination at ASC. So the fact that Ed Lockman did get in at ASC indicates to me that there is a general level of American support, and I think he's just an older, well-respected cinematographer that even Europeans will appreciate him, especially because the movie Maria, I think, leans a little bit more European, premiered at Venice, for example, so has that benefit. And then for this last thought, the way I looked at it was I wanted to have a past nominee. I went with Ed Lockman in Maria over someone like a Greg Fraser in Dune because there's a gut level to me that thinks that they're not going to respond to Dune. And that's in part because of the types of movies that they usually nominate. And actually, in a way, the movies that they snub. They didn't nominate Avatar 2. They didn't nominate Lord of the Rings 2. They didn't nominate The Batman. They didn't nominate Top Gun Maverick. These are all kind of Hollywood mainstream blockbusters. Also, they're remakes or they're sequels. This group, even a movie like The Batman. Greg Fraser got all the precursors for The Batman and didn't get in at the Oscars. In the same way, Greg Fraser has gotten all the nominations here for Dune, and I don't think he's going to get in. For some reason, this branch is a little bit tricky, a little bit peculiar. They do not like to nominate seems like sequels or remakes, and it's been this way for a long time. They're a little bit more European, so instead I went with Emilia Pérez, which is more of the European type of selection, and then in my fifth slot went with Maria because it's not a remake and it's also from a well-respected branch favorite in the case of Ed Lockman. Then Best Animated Feature, I have The Wild Robot, Flow, Inside Out 2, Memoir of a Snail, and Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul. This is a pretty easy 5 lineup. They've gotten everywhere. The one alternative would be Moana 2, but the Academy usually goes towards the more indie movies like A Memoir of a Snail more than a mainstream blockbuster like Moana 2, particularly because the movie Moana 2 wasn't as celebrated as the first one. Feel very confident in that lineup of 5. Then for Best Editing, I went with Conclave, Emilia Pérez, Anora, Dune Part 2, and A Complete Unknown. This was a really tough category to kind of hash out, but once I did, I thought it made sense. So the top 3, Conclave, Emilia Pérez, and Anora, are kind of the 3, I would say, maybe top Best Picture contenders. I also think they're going to get in for editing because there's a strong connection between the editing category and the Best Picture category. Essentially, you take the top 5 contenders in Best Picture and you put them in for editing, and you'll probably do okay. So they've also got in at a lot of places, BAFTA, Ace Eddie, what have you. Then I went with Dune Part 2. I went with it because the last movie, Dune, won in this category. So I think that, and that was a year where BAFTA actually went with No Time to Die. So the Academy in particular likes Dune and likes editing. They also like Joe Walker, who is a 2-time winner in this category. He also did Dune Part 2. Has the benefit of being epic in scale, long, and having these kind of intense action sequences. Usually the action type movies get in for editing. So while it's not, in my mind, a top 5 Best Picture contender, I do think it's been well represented in terms of BAFTA and Ace Eddie to also get in. I don't think there's going to be a snub here in this category because editing is not like cinematography where they're peculiar against sequels. They're totally okay with it here, so I expect Dune to get nominated. And then in my final spot, I did go with A Complete Unknown, and went with that because I looked at some of James Mangold's past movies that got nominated for Best Picture, like Ford v Ferrari most recently, which won in editing, and then Walk the Line back in 2005, which didn't get nominated for Best Picture, but did get nominated for Best Editing. And then you look at past other music biographies like Bohemian Rhapsody or Elvis. They also got nominated in editing. Bohemian Rhapsody even won in editing. So clearly there's a well-liked appreciation from this branch of the Academy that likes these kind of music-based movies, intercutting between the stage and the fans and the reactions. A Complete Unknown has been surging in recent weeks. It clearly seems to be a movie that is well-liked within the industry, in particular DGA overperformance, SAG overperformance, BAFTA overperformance. So I'm going to give it another overperformance here and get it in for Best Editing. Thought about The Brutalist, but was just very shocked that it didn't get in at Ace Eddie and it didn't get in at BAFTA Longlist. And really, there's no excuses for the movie to miss, even though The Brutalist, I think, is still more of a movie to potentially get win Best Picture than A Complete Unknown, probably still a stronger Best Picture movie. A Complete Unknown has the more precursors and the more traditional type of nomination in terms of its editing style. Then Best Production Design, I went with Wicked, Dune Part 2, The Brutalist, Conclave, and Nosferatu. Feel good about this. They've gone in pretty much most places. Art Directors Guild, Set Directors Guild, BAFTA. 4 out of the 5 are past nominees. Feel really good about that. Also, many of them are Best Picture nominees, and there's a strong connection between Best Picture and Best Production Design. And then, like I said earlier, there's an overlap with this category and Best Cinematography of an average of about 3 out of 5. Right now, how my predictions are lined up, it's exactly 3 out of 5. Then Best Costume Design, I went with Wicked, Nosferatu, Conclave, A Complete Unknown, and Beetlejuice. A really another tough category. Using my confidence in my Best Production Design lineup predictions to ultimately help my Best Costume Design predictions, because similarly with the cinematography category and production design, there is a bit of an overlap between production design and costume design, although it's actually even less strong. You can say it's 3 out of 5. There's many years though where it's only 2 out of 5. You go back over the years, it's like 3 out of 5 overlap, 2 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 2 out of 5. Those are kind of the trends. So when I was looking at my predictions between production design, which I am confident in, they helped influence my costume design predictions. So the first 3 in Wicked, Nosferatu, and Conclave, I also have in for production design. So I felt fine with having those 3 in there as well. And they've gotten in at a lot of places like BAFTA, like the Costume Designers Guild, what have you. Then in my 4th spot, I did go with A Complete Unknown. This is me once again betting on the recent surge of this movie, also translating with the Academy. This is also from a 3-time nominee in the case of Ariana Phillips, so well liked within the branch. Got in at BAFTA, and there's a little bit of concern that maybe why didn't it get in at Critics' Choice, but I think that's just because it wasn't seen as much and wasn't seen by as many people. Clearly though, getting in at Costume Designers Guild, getting in at BAFTA, and even stuff like, production design getting shortlisted at BAFTA, there is an appreciation of the kind of style of the movie and the period nature of it. And then in my 5th spot, I want to go with Beetlejuice as a wild card. For me, I wanted to include a fantasy movie rather than another period movie like Gladiator 2. Gladiator 2 has been in the decline for weeks. Janty Yates isn't a super well-loved costume designer, even though she just recently got nominated and has won before. She doesn't have a whole lot of nominations. And I wanted to go with 3 period and 2 fantasy sci-fi, because that's the historical trends, where it's almost always 3 period exactly and 2 fantasy sci-fi, a good mix of recreation and something brand new. So I wanted to go with fantasy. So what were my options for fantasy? To me, it was Beetlejuice or it was Dune. Both of them had the exact same kind of precursors. Both got in at BAFTA Longlist. Both got in at the Costume Designers Guild for the fantasy category. So then it was a question of, okay, well, 2 things. I could either go with the movie that was the stronger Best Picture movie, in the case of Dune, or the costume designer that was more well-liked. And I went with the latter. Colleen Atwood is the costume designer for Beetlejuice. She is a 4-time winner, whereas Dune's Jacqueline West has never won before. Colleen Atwood hasn't been nominated in a few years. I feel like she's maybe overdue for a nomination. And the costume design branch usually likes to nominate movies like Cruella or Cyrano or Pinocchio, movies that aren't super well-loved Best Picture movies. In the same way, the production design category usually overlaps with Best Picture. Costume design will often frequently nominate movies that maybe aren't even critically well-liked if the costumes are very well done. And now you have one, in this case, fantasy from a 4-time winner, really well-respected costume designer in Colleen Atwood. And like I mentioned, if I included Dune Part 2, that would be an overlap of 4 out of 5 with production design and costume design. That's pretty rare. That doesn't really happen. It's usually only 2 out of 5 overlap or 3 out of 5 overlap. So I want to go with Beetlejuice as a way to kind of also adhere to those rules. Then for best makeup and hairstyling, I went with The Substance, Wicked, Nosferatu, Emilia Pérez, and Beetlejuice. Another situation where I feel good in the top 3 and then maybe not in the bottom 2. Even though Nosferatu is in my top 3, didn't get in at the Makeup and Hairstyling Guild nominations. That was really early on in the season, so I didn't want to hold too much towards that. Did get in at BAFTA. Is a movie that's surging late after its Christmas release, like A Complete Unknown, and has significant prosthetics. So I have it in there, alongside Wicked and Substance, 2 strong Best Picture movies with significant amounts of makeup. And then in my 4th spot, I went with Emilia Pérez. I had always thought that this would be a contender even when it was at 100 to 1 odds, just because I'd seen the movie and there was a significant transformation. Transforming Karla Sofía Gascón into a man at the beginning of the movie, pre-transition, before she transitions into Emilia Pérez. This category and this branch really likes not necessarily makeup and hair, but more so prosthetics, and oftentimes likes when you transform an actor into someone else. Think of Christian Bale for Vice, think of Bradley Cooper for Maestro. They like prosthetic work. This is exact scenario of that. Lots of prosthetic work in a movie that we predict to be nominated for Best Picture. That's a strong movie, as well as an actor who is potentially going to be, and I think likely nominated for Best Lead Actress in the case of Karla Sofía Gascón. And then I went with Beetlejuice, just because I had it in for costume design. This is also a movie that overperformed in terms of nominations at the Oscar shortlist, so I don't want to disregard that completely. It's a movie that got 3 nominations at the Makeup and Hairstyling Guild Awards, tied for the most, so clearly there's some support and some love there for Beetlejuice. For me, it would feel strange to nominate it for costume design and then not nominate it for makeup. Ultimately, with these predictions, I'm going to go for 100%. That's my goal. I'm not trying to be safe and conservative. If I were, then it would be something like Dune Part 2, but I'm not. I want to go with a little bit of an outsider pick, in the same way where makeup and costumes, both branches will go with movies that aren't the most critically well acclaimed. I feel like Beetlejuice fits in well here because of those 3 makeup and hairstyling nominations. Still made the BAFTA long list, and the movie overperformed in terms of the Oscar shortlist, showing up at a place like Best Score. So I think it should be a contender at the very least for a couple categories, so I wanted to include it here. It is also from 2 past winners. I wanted to mention that too. Then my predictions for Best Score. I have Conclave, The Brutalist, Emilia Pérez, The Wild Robot, and Wicked. So the top 4 have gone in everywhere. BAFTA, the Golden Globes. You have Emilia Pérez, which is a musical. The Wild Robot, animated movies, which can do quite well in this category. And then Conclave and The Brutalist, 2 Best Picture movies that have very noticeable booming scores. And then in my final spot, what ultimately helped me make my prediction was to figure out what types of movies do I kind of get wrong. In this category, I usually get 1 wrong a year. So I went back and saw, like, okay, what are the movies that got in that I didn't predict, and what do they have in common? And essentially what I figured out was it was either a strong Best Picture movie or it was a well-liked past nominee. So I went through the options here and ultimately went with Wicked because it is a strong Best Picture movie and it's also a past nominee in the case of John Powell. So went with that over a movie like Challengers, which could be a contender because it did win, at the Golden Globes, and I am predicting it's probably going to win at Critics' Choice Awards as well for Best Score. But my concern with that movie is that, it's not as strong as Wicked. It didn't make the shortlist at BAFTA, which is concerning. And Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, even though they're 2-time nominees, they don't always get nominated. And, movies like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or Gone Girl got a good number of precursors and then didn't get in at the Oscars. They're not a guarantee for a nomination like that. So it was essentially Challengers, which is a past nominee, versus Wicked, which is a past nominee and a strong Best Picture movie. Went with Wicked because of that. I also want to mention Stephen Schwartz, who is the kind of co-composer on the movie, also is getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Music Supervisors Guild. That helps. And then if you want to go even deeper to something like the Society of Composers and Song Lyricists, Wicked got in that, and Challengers did not, even though Challengers got in for Best Song at that award show. So a little bit of kind of indications as well to show that Wicked is maybe a little bit stronger than we think. And if I'm predicting this movie to be a well-liked Best Picture movie, well-liked Best Picture movies usually overperform in terms of nominations on Oscar morning. If that's the debate between this or Challengers, I'm going to go with the Best Picture movie most times. Then for Best Sound, I went with Dune Part 2, Wicked, A Complete Unknown, Emilia Pérez, and Gladiator 2. This actually felt pretty confident to me, pretty easy to predict. Essentially, the top 3 got in at the Cinema Audio Society nominations, as well as the Motion Picture Sound Editors Guild nominations. And then Emilia Pérez got in at the MPSE with 2 nominations, but didn't get in at CAS. That doesn't bother me. And Gladiator 2 didn't get in at MPSE, but did get in at CAS. Usually, essentially, what you like to look at for this category is the CAS nominees. Essentially, there's an overlap of 4 out of the 5 CAS nominees get nominated at the Oscars. So I took out Deadpool and Wolverine and put in Emilia Pérez, which is a well-liked Best Picture movie. Like I said, I expected to overperform, and it also got 2 nominations at MPSE. So there is some sound love there too, and it's also a musical, so music-based movies have noticeable sound when you think about the movie, so you want to nominate it in this category here. Feel pretty good about that lineup of 5. Then Best Song, I have El Mal, Emilia Pérez, Mi Camino, Emilia Pérez, The Journey, The 6888, Kiss the Sky from The Wild Robot, and Compress Repress from Challengers. So the 2 songs from Emilia Pérez have gotten in everywhere. Expect those to get in. Then I went with The Journey from 6888. You may not have heard of this movie. It does not matter. This is from songwriter Diane Warren, who has been nominated 7 years in a row and 15 times total. She is a branch favorite. They love her. Definitely put that movie in your predictions. Then I went with Kiss the Sky from The Wild Robot. Animated movies usually get nominated in this category, so I expect that to get nominated from a well-liked movie in the case of The Wild Robot. And then in that 5th spot, I went with Compress Repress from Challengers, which has gotten in everywhere. Frankly, you'd be a little bit silly not to include it in your predictions, just because it got in at the Society of Composers and Song Lyricists, it got in at Golden Globes, it got in at Critics' Choice Awards. Clearly, this song is really well liked and well appreciated, so would expect Challengers Compress Repress to get in. Then Best Documentary, I went with Sugarcane, No Other Land, Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, Black Box Diaries, and Porcelain War. Always a tough category to predict, but I'll tell you my reasons for these picks. So Sugarcane is a movie with pretty much the most nominations, tied with something like Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, which wasn't longlisted. It's got a lot of nominations, a lot of support from a bunch of different groups. It also has kind of a societally relevant topic. We know that this group, the documentary branch of the Academy, is very politically and societally focused. They're not going to go with a Will and Harper, like a celebrity movie. They're going to go with the more politically charged type of a movie, which Sugarcane definitely is, and it's just been getting recognition all over the place. No Other Land is another movie that's been getting a lot of recognition, lots of precursors, not as many as Sugarcane, but it's definitely still a lot. Got in at BAFTA as well, and is a very politically relevant movie, essentially a co-collaboration between an Israeli journalist and Palestinian activists, documenting the kind of occupation of the Israeli forces in an area of Palestine. So definitely something that is a hot button issue in the world today, and I think the documentary branch would want to reward this kind of an effort in kind of movie activism. Then I went with Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, which importantly got nominated at the both Indie Spirit Awards and the IDAs. If you get nominated at both these award shows, there's a very high likelihood that you'll get nominated at the Oscars, and has also gotten other precursors as well. Maybe a little bit too strange and odd to get nominated, but the documentary branch is still okay, and it has a bit of a political, historical lens of things, and they're still okay with more non-traditional type movies. They don't like the traditional type movies, they like the more experimental type stuff, which Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat fits very well. Then I went with Black Box Diaries. This is from MTV Films and Sheila Nevins. Sheila Nevins is a longtime HBO documentary producer and been nominated for a bunch of Emmys and has been nominated for a couple of Oscars. And since she moved over to MTV Films, she's done a terrific job at getting Oscar nominations. Most recently in this category, movies like Ascension or The Eternal Memory got nominated here. The movie got nominated at BAFTA. I do expect a overlap between the two, so that helps. And then in my fifth spot, I went with Porcelain War, which is a bit of an outsider pick on a place like Gold Derby, but I think has a strong chance of getting nominated. First of all, it's about the Ukraine war, so it has that very political, topical factor. It got nominated at PGA and DGA. I'm going to talk about PGA for a second here because usually PGA, the 5 nominations or 6 nominations that they go with, usually there's an overlap of about at least 1 or 2. Every year for the past few years, I think it's 5 or 6 in a row, PGA, their lineup, there's been at least one movie that's gotten in at the Oscars. And this year, the only one that has a possible contention is something like Porcelain War. So I don't want to go against PGA. There's clearly some sign of support there. Also got in at DGA, also got in at some other precursors. So it's a movie with a strong number of precursors. And it has the political message on top of that as well. And I went with this movie over a movie like, let's say, Daughters, because Daughters actually got in at BAFTA, and that's not a good thing. I went back over the past 5 years, and 4 out of the last 5 years, there's been exactly a 2 out of 5 overlap between BAFTA and the Oscars. That is to say, pretty much look at the BAFTA lineup and pick 2 out of the 5 to overlap. So if I went with Daughters, that would have been a 3 out of 5 overlap. Only wanted to do 2. So I went with you have if Daughters is getting in, it goes against a BAFTA stat, which I don't really love, and it's not as political as a movie like Porcelain War, and they have a similar number of precursor nominations, except Porcelain War has a benefit as well of being a PGA, which is a little bit slightly more relevant and predictive than a case like BAFTA. Then for my Best Visual Effects nominations, I went with Dune Part 2, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Better Man, Alien Romulus, and Twisters. So Dune, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and Better Man have gone in pretty much everywhere. Even something like Better Man getting in at the Annies for live action is a strong sign of support for that movie. We'll be very surprised if those 3, none of them got nominated. And then I went with Alien Romulus and Twisters, 2 kind of an outsider picks, but I'll explain to you why I went with them. Ultimately, Alien Romulus, I wanted to reward this movie with a nomination in one of the categories because it overperformed in terms of the Oscar shortlist. I give a lot of credence to the Oscar shortlist because they're from the Academy. They're Academy members telling us what they like, and Alien Romulus is a prime example of that. It also has the type of visual effects that they like. They don't really like big talking creatures speaking. They like more well-integrated, practical, with an extension of VFX style animation. So Alien Romulus is a prime example of that. It did get 1 nomination at VES and it did get nominated at the BAFTA long list, so there is appreciation there. I wish it would have done better in terms of some of these precursors, but I do think just in terms of my gut, in terms of what the Academy's already told us, they like Alien Romulus. I wanted to include it here. And then in that final spot, I went with Twisters because it showed up at the main category, Best Visual Effects in a Full or Real Feature for the VES Awards. It did have some concerns in terms of okay, why didn't it also show up at BAFTA or anywhere else? But it is, to me, the fact that it got in at VES, that was kind of enough to make it a considerable contender. And then you think of the types of VFX that they usually like to reward. It's the supporting VFX, it's the integrated VFX. Over, I think, movies like Wicked, which has gone in a lot of places, yes, but is maybe more of a movie like Poor Things or Black Panther. Best Picture movies with maybe not the most flawless VFX. You have lots of talking animals in the case of Wicked, which they maybe don't like. Same thing with Gladiator 2. And I think it's notable the fact that Gladiator 2 and Wicked both got VES nominations, but only in set extension categories for their settings, Emerald City and Rome. Even though both of them had significant animal animation, CGI animal characters, we'll call them, neither of them got nominated in those VES categories, which indicates to me that there's an appreciation for the movies and the set extension, but there's not for the kind of main effects of the movie. The category usually likes to reward the kind of supporting stuff, so I went with Alien Romulus, I went with Twisters. Bit of kind of an outsider picks, but I think one of those 2 for sure is going to get nominated. Then for Best International Film, I went with Emilia Pérez, I'm Still Here, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, Kneecap, and Vermiglio. This is a really tough category that I wanted to predict an upset for, but just couldn't find the stats to prove it, so I went with kind of chalk. I went with the Gold Derby odds and said, you know what, let's just go with this and give it a shot. Don't really feel confident in this category, so I wouldn't listen too much to my predictions on this one, but Emilia Pérez definitely gets in. It's going to get nominated for Best Picture. I'm Still Here, I predict, is going to get a Fernanda Torres nomination, so I'd be remiss to not include it here. The Seed of the Sacred Fig has been getting not as much buzz as I thought, but still a festival-acclaimed Cannes movie. with a German, kind of from Germany, and usually European movies do well in this category. And usually I try to pick one movie that was not nominated for Critics' Choice Awards or Golden Globes, because most years we get one of those. But I couldn't do that this year, so I just went with one movie from Golden Globes and one movie from Critics' Choice Awards. Kneecap got in at Critics' Choice, Vermiglio got in at the Golden Globes. Figured that makes sense. Could have gone with something like The Girl with the Needle, but that's from Mubi, and Mubi has done very poorly in this category in terms of getting nominations. Maybe this is their year where they finally get nominated. They have been becoming better and better distributor every year in terms of getting Oscar nominations, but I'm not going to bet on them this year to overcome that statistic. So I went with Vermiglio, Italian movie, maybe more of a traditional type of a nomination for this category. Now the best short categories. This were a little bit hard to do research on, but still did do some, so I wanted to mention those. So my nominations for best animated short, I went with Wander to Wonder, Beautiful Men, Maybe Elephants, In the Shadow of the Cypress, and A Bear Named Wojciech. So Wander to Wonder has lots of festival acclaim, very strange and kind of chaotic in the second half, so I think will be memorable. Beautiful Men similarly has some festival acclaim. Both anime movies were distributed by Miyu, which is a distributor who oftentimes gets nominated in this category, and that matters, distributors, because it means their movie's been seen. So Beautiful Men and Wander to Wonder both have that benefit. Maybe Elephants is from a director who's a past winner and 3-time nominee in this category, also from the National Film Board of Canada, who oftentimes does very well in this animated short category. So I'm betting on the talent of the director and the respectability of the director and the respectability of, in this case, the distributor. In the Shadow of the Cypress is a movie that won at Tribeca against a lot of steep competition. There's an overlap sometimes between winning at festivals and getting nominations here. And then A Bear Named Wojciech is an interesting true story, also voiced by Richard Gadd, who's the creator and star of Baby Reindeer, so it has a bit of a celebrity factor to that. The movie's also been doing a lot of campaigning. I've seen lots of ads for it, and if that's been getting in front of me, it's probably been getting in front of Academy member voters. I think that would be enough to get nominated. Then Best Documentary Short, I have I Am Ready Warden, Once Upon a Time in Ukraine, Only Girl in the Orchestra, Incident, and Chasing Rue. So I Am Ready Warden, this is from MTV. We mentioned how they're doing very well with documentaries, getting nominated multiple times in the feature category as well as the short category for movies like St. Louis Superman. So I think that I'm Ready Warden, politically relevant movie, so the documentary branch will appreciate that. And from MTV, so it's a strong distributor. You know the movie's going to get seen. Once Upon a Time in Ukraine, a politically relevant movie from Ukraine. Betsy Wetz, who's the director, who's been nominated for other documentaries like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RPG, that documentary. So well-respected documentarian. Only Girl in the Orchestra. This importantly won the Critics' Choice Awards for Best Documentary Short. In the past 5 years, 4 out of the last 5 winners of this category also got nominated at the Oscars. So the fact that this one here really helps. Also being distributed by Netflix, you know it's going to be well seen. Then I have Incident, which is from New Yorker. They oftentimes get nominated in these short categories because, once again, they're available online. They're very easy to see. This is a unique CCTV type of approach. Will stand out amongst some of the different documentary nominees. I think it will get in. And then Chasing Rue, another MTV Films movie, so know it's going to be seen. And from 2-time nominated director Sky Fitzgerald. I think definitely that will matter. A little bit of a difficult subject matter to engage with. It's a little bit dark and depressing, but I do think it's important. It's a bit of an activist with animals. It's going to be well seen from a 2-time nominated director. Then we have Best Live Action Short. My nominees are The Man Who Could Not Remain Silent, The Masterpiece, Dovecote, I'm Not a Robot, and An Orange from Jaffa. Masterpiece got a lot of festival acclaim and got in for Mubi. Same thing with A Man Who Could Not Remain Silent, probably the best of the bunch, really well respected and getting the most amount of precursors and the most amount of kind of other festival acclaim and nominations. Dovecote, this is starring Zoe Saldana. That means it will be seen, and that means it will have notoriety. And we've seen kind of average vibe piece live action shorts get nominated just because they had Riz Ahmed or Oscar Isaac in the movies. So the fact that Zoe Saldana, I think, could potentially even win for Best Supporting Actress is in a live action short will give a lot of notoriety to the movie and get it nominated. I'm Not a Robot, this is from New Yorker, who get their movies seen, in particular their live action shorts with movies like Night of Fortune a couple of years ago, or Night Ride last year got nominated, or maybe it was 2 years ago. they oftentimes get their live action shorts seen and nominated. So I also have I'm Not a Robot, also a funny, interesting name. Usually with these short categories, if people don't see them, they just vote for the ones that have the funniest names. And then my final prediction is An Orange from Jaffa. This is another weird name, but it's also a very politically relevant movie about a man trying to navigate the kind of Israeli-Palestinian border and the tension that comes from that. So I think that will resonate, particularly as this conflict is so in the news nowadays. But that's about it. Those are my predictions in the longest video of the year. My favorite video of the year, though. I did so much research for months ready for this video ultimately. So I'd love if you comment below your own predictions. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel. On Thursday, I'm going to be giving my live reactions to the Oscar nominations when they're happening. You can see that and watch it. And then we're going to be still continuing with the channel and giving my predictions for other award shows. Then, of course, breaking down the Oscar winners. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.